Here's a question for all four panelists, participants tonight. And I'll address it first to the negative side. Does the absence of a new theory necessarily mean that the present theory is sufficiently adequate?
Try us again on that.
Does the absence of a new theory necessarily mean that the present theory is sufficiently adequate?
No. Yeah. No, I would say definitely not. I mean, there have been a whole, the history of science is replete with examples of theories that at once seemed very reasonable and appeared to fit the data, that were, in some cases, well worked out mathematically even, mathematics at the time. And later, as more and more, as data were accumulated, it became clear that there were problems. And you could add epicycles and make modifications to the theory, but eventually it gets to the point where you say, well, this theory simply doesn't work. It may be true in some cases, but as an all-embracing, all-encompassing theory, it doesn't hold. And then there's a period of time where alternative hypotheses are posed. There are parts of the old theory are salvaged, but to question an existing theory in the absence of a competitor theory does not mean that that default position has to be accepted. In fact, I would say that accepting any theory as a foregone conclusion it's profoundly unscientific.
Let me answer on the other side here. That's, in fact, one of the strengths of science, okay? We're humans. We are trying to investigate the world by the best techniques we have. We're applying the rules of natural law and science as best we can. We're always revising theories, which is never a final solution. We're not at the point where we know all about the world and probably never will be. That's fine. Scientists are used to uncertainty. The point being, this is the way science operates. And then when a better theory comes along, we're willing to revise and sometimes throw out old theories. What we don't do is fall back on supernaturalism. We're not allowed to do that as scientists. That is a non-explanation. It doesn't fit.
Well, that leads me into my final question, and that is to both of you, both sides. Can intelligent design incorporate evolution? Can evolutionary theory incorporate intelligent design or aspects of it? Why don't you go first?
Oh, sure. I guess in a way that I think Francis Collins does in his book, The Language of God, in which he presents the argument that the science stands or falls on its own regardless of what your religious beliefs are. But it seems reasonable to argue that a deity or an intelligence or something like that built into the system itself from the very beginning processes that lead to complexity and design, features, morality, wings, eyes, whatever. That's not my position, but it seems like that's a reasonable one that Francis Collins argues. But that requires no intervention in the space-time continuum since the origins of the universe. It's just built that way. And so whether there's a deity outside of that or not is sort of irrelevant. It's sort of, you have to kind of take a leap of faith. Beyond that, as soon as you start allowing an entity, an intelligence of some kind to enter into our space and time, we want to know how does he do it? How does he operate? Does the intelligence use the laws of nature as we understand them to create things, or does he use some other force that we don't know about? And so it's a little unhelpful to say words like intelligence or intervened or created. These are information. These are just words that don't help us actually get to the core of the explanation. How does it happen? What's the actual molecular structure, the electromagnetic force, the whatever? That's really what we need to test.
I'm going to follow on that with another question, and that's, is it possible that the complexity of life, the deep complexity of life, is beyond human understanding?
Me?
Yes.
Oh. Well, I'd like to think it's not beyond human understanding, or else we'd give up, right? So, and we got to go to work tomorrow and do science. So, well, I mean, there might be something if you push it back far enough, like where did the stuff that banged in the Big Bang come from, or what was there before the multiverses, or you could find some infinite regress. And maybe there's things like solving the free will and determinism problem that probably are best resolved over adult beverages late at night because we're restricted by certain language restrictions that we use in our cognition that make it probably impossible. But that's more of a Wittgenstein kind of philosophical linguistic problem than it is a scientific one.
Gentlemen.
Can intelligent design incorporate evolution?
Yes.
That's the question. Absolutely, depending on what is meant by the term evolution. And that's one of the things we've been trying to insist upon tonight. There's the observation of change over time. That's one meaning of evolution. There's the idea of universal common ancestry. That's another meaning of evolution, which implies continuous unfolding, continuous change. Clearly, an intelligence can cause change over time. Intelligence can cause continuous change over time. But the third meaning of evolution, the specifically Darwinian or neo-Darwinian meaning, is the idea of a purely unguided process, in particular natural selection acting on random mutations of various kinds. If that's what you mean by evolution, if you're referring to the theory of evolution, which is with its affirmation of a purely unguided, undirected causal mechanism for the origin of the appearance of design, well then clearly intelligent design parts ways with that meaning of evolution. There are many theistic evolutionists who will say, yeah, I think that God is directing the evolutionary process. That's fine if you mean by that evolution number one and evolution number two, but even God can't direct an undirected process. That becomes not a theological problem, but just a logical one. And so I think this brings us back really to the central point of the debate, which is whether or not there is compelling evidence for the creative power of that unguided neo-Darwinian process. And Dr. Sternberg and I have argued tonight that there is not.
Okay, we're going to go to concluding statements now, and I'm going to ask the positive to lead on that. 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll say a few things and then Mike will wind up. When I accepted the terms of this debate, I was given the understanding that it would be an origin of life. And as we've said several times now, nothing that they've said over there is relevant to it. I showed you a whole series of chemical stories and reactions and chemical laboratory work, which has shown that in almost every step, from the simplest amino acid right up to complicated cells, which Michael mentioned, eukaryotic cells and the symbiotic mechanism of Margulis, almost all those steps now have been done in the laboratory. We don't have all the answers yet, but we have much or most of the story needed to figure out how life originated. And the point behind all this is that that is what's central to what's being talked about tonight. They haven't addressed any of it, which is surprising given that that was the title we were given. And the point being here is that all these work in science was done in laboratories by people who work on this problem directly, don't tour around the country writing books on biochemistry and they're not trained in biochemistry. And in particular, what they're doing is real science. They don't fall back on supernaturalism just because they haven't solved the problem. The problem is about solving things that can be solved. We don't have all the answers yet, but we're making much more progress than they'll give us credit for.
Okay. All right, hang on. Okay. Well, all right. Let me just read a short statement from Stephen's book. By the way, Stephen, I don't think you just fell off the turnip truck. You're a pretty smart guy.
Thank you, Michael. So are you.
Now that we've made up. So he writes here, the activity of a theistic God could provide an adequate explanation of the evidence of intelligent design in biology, though other entities could conceivably do so as well. So what would those entities be? I think it's an interesting question. Let's say it turns out that the origins of life did not happen here on Earth. Maybe it happened on some other planet and a piece of the planet got knocked out into space by a meteor impact and ended up here. Or in a more sci-fi scenario, let's say we found out that the Vegans sent it here on a pod. And we found the blueprints out in Blythe, buried in the desert, and there it is. We now know how the origins of life were formed by these other intelligences. Okay, well that would be pretty interesting, and NASA would get some new funding from Congress, and it would be a great discovery, but it wouldn't answer the question of the origins of life, would it? I mean, we still want to know something beyond the Vegans did it. Well, where did those guys come from?